The sterile, antiseptic smell of the hospital room was the first thing Elias Thorne registered. The second was the splitting, blinding pain in his skull from the near-fatal car accident. The third was the sound of his wife, Serafina, whispering in the hallway. He lay still, a phantom of paralysis, his jaw wired shut, his vision blurred, but his hearing terrifyingly acute. He was meant to be unconscious for days, a fact his wife clearly believed. "It's done, Julian," Serafina murmured, her voice tight with suppressed excitement. "Elias signed the holding company documents 3 weeks ago, just general portfolio management permissions. He'll never remember. The funds are cleared and routed. 5 million. They're gone." A deeper, masculine voice, sickeningly familiar, replied, "Beautifully executed, my love. We move fast. With him incapacitated, it'll be months before the auditors flag anything, and by then, we'll be untraceable. He'll wake up a wealthy man on paper, but financially crippled. He won't be able to pursue us. We stripped him bare." Elias recognized the voice of Julian Vance, his longtime rival and supposed friend, the man he had trusted with the keys to his secondary ventures. The betrayal was not a stab in the back. It was a surgical removal of his financial heart while he was strapped to the operating table. It ignited a cold, chemical fire in Elias's core, an immediate, absolute clarity that transcended his physical pain. He was not a victim. He was a weapon, forged in the heat of humiliation, and the life he was now building would not be one of recovery, but of annihilation. Elias discharged himself against medical advice, signing the waiver with a shaky hand, the ink blurring slightly. He didn't feel pain. He felt purpose. The moment he stepped back into the opulent emptiness of his penthouse, a space designed by Serafina, now polluted by her treachery, the real work began. The crime was a masterpiece of cold efficiency. $5 million liquidated from the private investment vehicle, moved through 3 offshore accounts, and vanished, leaving behind only the ghost of forged digital signatures. He didn't rage. Rage was inefficient. He sat at his mahogany desk, a figure of icy composure, and studied the forensic audit report he commissioned using his last remaining accessible funds. The theft was not an act of passion but a long con. The signatures had been subtly practiced for a year, the accounts established with meticulous foresight. They hadn't just stolen money. They had systematically dismantled his trust. Elias had been a strategist, a master of corporate warfare and financial arbitrage. Now his entire immense intellect was focused on a single, lethal objective. He needed to disappear completely to build a trap they wouldn't expect. They assumed he would pursue them via traditional legal channels, exhausting his remaining capital on international lawyers while they enjoyed their spoils. Elias knew better. He knew the system favored speed and ruthlessness. He sold his last remaining assets, an obscure portfolio of intellectual property rights and an old cabin in the mountains, funding his exile and his operation. He severed every tie, closed his accounts, deactivated his phone, and vanished from the grid. He didn't mourn the loss of his life. That life was a sham, built on a lie. His new existence was dedicated to the hunt. Elias spent the next 6 months in the sterile silence of a rented, windowless office in a different continent, immersed in the dark undercurrents of global finance. He did not seek comfort or distraction. He drank black coffee and worked. He specialized in finding the structural weakness in financial empires. His targets, Serafina and Julian, had made 2 classic errors: overconfidence and greed. The $5 million was just seed money for their new venture, a high-risk, high-reward investment firm in Dubai designed to use his capital to leverage their names. Elias didn't just want the money back. He wanted to destroy the entire scaffolding of their new lives. He began by creating a phantom shell corporation named Ethelred Acquisitions, a name chosen for its ancient, grim meaning. This entity was designed to be untraceable, a ghost in the financial machine, existing only to shadow and interact with Julian's new firm. He used his deep knowledge of their business methodologies, the flaws he had pointed out to Julian years ago, to anticipate their movements. He wasn't just tracking them. He was learning to breathe their financial air, preparing to poison it. The plan wasn't to sue them. It was to frame them for crimes far greater than simple theft, to ensure their destruction was absolute and permanent. The only emotion driving him was the cold, unyielding satisfaction of perfect, inevitable control. 1 year and 3 months passed since Elias heard the whisper in the hospital hallway. He had become a ghost. His hair was longer, streaked with gray, his eyes carrying the perpetual, focused intensity of a predator who has abandoned the sun. He lived frugally, funneling nearly every cent of his remaining capital into Ethelred acquisitions, making it appear as a legitimate, highly aggressive hedge fund based out of Singapore. The isolation was absolute. He deliberately pushed away the few people who tried to reach out, old partners, concerned family members. Every conversation, every interaction, was a potential risk to the integrity of the trap. The burden of revenge didn't feel like a weight. It felt like a corrosive acid burning away anything non-essential, leaving only the hardened, pure steel of his will. He accepted the loneliness as a necessary purification. His humanity was the collateral damage, and he didn't mourn its loss. Serafina and Julian, fueled by Elias's stolen $5 million, had flourished, just as he predicted. They had leveraged the seed money into a $50 million portfolio, flaunting their success in social media posts from yachts and ski chalets. Their faces, smug and victorious in digital frames, were the fuel that kept Elias working through endless nights. The powerful turning point arrived not through kindness, but through Julian's fundamental, crippling greed. Elias had intercepted coded communications showing Julian was running a dark pool operation, an illegal, unregulated trading platform used to manipulate stock prices for short-term, astronomical gains. It was a secret, unauthorized side deal, even hidden from Serafina, intended to multiply Julian's personal fortune far beyond their shared enterprise. This was the vulnerability Elias had waited for. The $5 million theft was a minor felony. This dark pool was a high-grade, international financial crime carrying sentences measured in decades. Elias executed the shift in his plan with surgical precision. Ethelred Acquisitions became a significant counterparty to Julian's dark pool, but instead of engaging in criminal activity, Elias simply documented it. He used advanced deep learning algorithms to map every single illegal transaction, every manipulated stock price, and every offshore receiver account Julian had established. He meticulously created a parallel ledger, showing how the proceeds of the original $5 million theft were directly and sequentially used to seed Julian's illegal operation. This meant that the initial theft, a civil matter, was now legally linked to a vast criminal conspiracy, transforming the charge from grand larceny to international racketeering and systemic fraud. He didn't just want to take their wealth. He wanted to ensure they lost their freedom and their names. He funneled all the evidence, thousands of pages of complex, layered data, cross-referenced with bank regulations and criminal statutes, to a single, powerful, and incorruptible U.S. federal prosecutor he had subtly vetted over months. Elias would not need to testify or even show his face. The evidence, presented anonymously and flawlessly, would speak for itself. His revenge was no longer about recovery. It was about ensuring the complete, cold, and absolute destruction of two lives. The confrontation was orchestrated at a black-tie charity gala, Julian and Serafina's coming-out party as legitimate power brokers, hosted in a gleaming skyscraper ballroom overlooking the city. Elias watched from a private, soundproofed observation suite across the street, a pair of high-powered binoculars pressed to his eyes. He saw them smiling, basking in the reflected glow of their ill-gotten success. They were untouchable, they believed. At precisely 9:45 p.m., a carefully timed moment during the keynote address, Elias executed the final sequence. He didn't send a personal message. He didn't step into the room. His revenge was delivered by the external world he had weaponized. First, an anonymous, highly detailed report containing the evidence of Julian's dark pool operation hit the inboxes of every major financial news editor and regulatory body globally. Simultaneously, the U.S. Attorney's Office, armed with Elias's airtight documentation, launched a synchronized raid on the new firm's headquarters, seizing all physical and digital assets. Elias saw the moment Julian's phone buzzed with the news. The smile evaporated. Serafina, noticing the sudden pallor, leaned in, her gaze frantic. Elias watched Julian whisper something to her, probably about the raid. He then watched Serafina's eyes dart around the room, not for Elias, but for an escape route, a look of primal, cornered desperation. But the final, crippling blow was yet to land. The second report, specifically targeting Serafina, was published, a meticulously researched article detailing how the initial $5 million theft was the criminal predicate for the entire subsequent illegal empire. Elias had structured the legal argument so that her role in the initial fraud was sufficient to implicate her in the later, massive racketeering conspiracy Julian had orchestrated. She hadn't just stolen $5 million. She had become the necessary foundation for a criminal enterprise. The climax arrived in the ballroom not with a gunshot, but with the quiet, authoritative presence of two men in dark suits from the FBI's white-collar crime division, accompanied by local law enforcement. They moved through the crowd with grim efficiency. Elias watched as Serafina, still beautiful in her expensive gown, and Julian, still wearing his look of desperate denial, were quietly escorted out of the gala through a service entrance. Their capture was clean, silent, and public enough to be deeply humiliating. Their reputation, their freedom, and their future were extinguished in the space of 3 minutes. Elias had not just taken their money. He had ensured they would spend the next decade in prison, reflecting on a success that was entirely temporary and built on the foundation of a greater crime. Elias lowered the binoculars. The fire that had sustained him for over a year, the pure hatred that had been his only companion, began to subside. He was financially secure, his justice was complete, and his enemies were utterly destroyed. There was no joy, no relief, only a profound, freezing emptiness where the hatred used to reside. He had successfully outsourced the destruction of others, but in doing so, he had become an instrument, and instruments have no soul. He had won the war, but he had extinguished the world within himself. Moral of the story: the fire used to incinerate your enemies often leaves the victor standing alone in the ashes.